We are back for another episode of Boardroom RevOps, where we're bringing you valuable tips from RevOps experts so you can make it to the C-suite. Got James here, co-founder of Accounting, the RevOps BI platform. Great guest today with Franco Anzini joining us to talk about career advancement in RevOps. Great to have you on, Franco.
Thanks for having me. This is always exciting to talk about. Great topic.
Of course. I don't think your resume could have any better proof points for your ability to chat RevOps career growth. You've been VP of RevOps at a number of great scale-ups, including Malwarebytes and Alation, and you've gone even further than just RevOps, having been COO at LeanData and now SVP of Go-to-Market Strategy and Ops at Provus. I may have just spoiled your intro, but what did I miss, Franco? What else should folks know about your background?
I think a couple of things to note is that, like most people, I fell into RevOps by accident at a very early point in my career and just kind of progressed, right? A lot of it is right place, right time. And as you said, some companies that had great scaling stories, and then some companies that were already at scale that wanted to be public or have an exit. And so kind of seen it all and tasted all the different flavors of ice cream, as they say.
Yeah, I imagine that goes a long way in kind of getting your new role too, so you can tell the growth story having done both too. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. Well, let's dive right in then to career progression. So I guess reflecting on your career, this is maybe the broadest question I'll ask you, but what do you attribute to your career progression to VP of RevOps and beyond? You mentioned having the good fortune of working for a number of great companies, but what else from the you standpoint?
Yeah, so I think the opportunity is first and foremost, right? Sometimes you have to be in the right place at the right time, but sometimes the place that you're in, you have to position yourself such that you have the potential to advance your career, right? And that's always a tricky one because I think people are sometimes very myopic about, they just put the blinders on and they're like, what's the next step? What's the next step? And we know that RevOps means different things at different companies of different sizes. And so instead of having the blinders on, if you open the aperture, you see places on the side that you can get involved with that just, maybe the career progression takes a bit more of a scenic route. But ultimately, it's focused on helping the business, and that's what gets noticed by executives and leadership teams. So I'd say that's first and foremost. And then the second one, which is almost equally as important, is you need role models or examples of what the next step in a career looks like. I was fortunate early in my career, my first job in RevOps, I had a great manager who'd been doing RevOps for a long time and had this great breadth of knowledge. Very quickly, you start to realize that's what the next step looks like. So I've got to be as good as Mike, right? And that just carries through in your career. And I think RevOps, certainly there's different ways to navigate it just because of the way the role manifests. But as you want to start moving up from RevOps to different leadership roles, you need those role models or exemplars that you can model yourself after.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'm hearing, join a great company with a lot of surface area for impact. Find someone great to work under who can be your role model. Obviously, not everyone, especially in this hiring market, has the luxury of picking and choosing where they end up. But if someone was kind of going through an interview process right now, any tips on how folks should assess the chance at those things in the company they're interviewing for?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on the company, the space they're in, the scale that they're at, because there are plenty of great companies that maybe they're just not scaling right now. And so a RevOps role there is just keep the lights on and kind of optimize the plumbing, right? Whereas maybe a smaller company or a company in a newer space, dare I say AI, and they're building the plumbing as they're building the house, right? And all kinds of opportunity to really get involved in the business. So I think, as cliche as it sounds, if you're looking for ways that you can impact the business, then you can start to visualize the flow and the different areas, right? So if you're looking for a role in RevOps and you read the job description, you talk to people, and it sounds like a system admin, that's where you want to ask the questions, right? Is this really just a system admin, or is there, different systems, and who owns the systems? Is that moving? And kind of play it out to see, right? There's nothing wrong with an area of specialization, but you don't want to go a mile deep and an inch wide, as they say, right?
Yeah. Any advice? Maybe it's a hypothetical example or an example you recall from maybe a bit earlier in your career where, to your first point, you opened up the aperture a little bit and were able to get involved in something broader than maybe a traditional, narrow scope of RevOps. How should folks think about doing that?
Yeah, I think people need to look at what the company is trying to achieve, because I think no matter the stage or the maturity of the company, organizations are constantly pivoting, and you have to know kind of where they're pivoting to, right? And I'll give you an example. Earlier in my career, I was at a company that just had a ton of transactional data, but they weren't doing anything with it. And it sat over with the product team, and then I went to engineering, and like nobody knew what to do with this. And it was something that I was able to look at and say the future growth of this company is tied to leveraging that data, but nobody's doing anything with it. So can I do it? Like give me a crack at it, right? And let me see how I can tie it together with what I know about the go-to-market motion and the different sales channels. And that was something where, you in those days you wouldn't think to give RevOps access to that kind of data for obvious reasons, but the space that we were in and the way we were scaling rapidly, that unlocked all kinds of different opportunities and different discussions that we could have about the way the company was going to market, the different sales channels, how we wanted to staff things. What was this data starting to show us the beginnings of a PLG motion? Like all these different conversations, right? And back to the original point of make sure you can impact the business, like those are the discussions that leaders want to have. Like they don't care about how you dedupe data in a system or whatever, right? Like how can we get more revenue? How can we save more expense? What areas are we missing? Stuff like that. It's much higher level, much more strategic conversation. And that's what every RevOps person in their career says, at least I've heard, right? I want to be more strategic. I want to be more strategic. Well, that's how you do it.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. Exactly where I was going next is like I hear that so often from folks at the mid-level of RevOps, and I empathize with it. But the advice I hear from folks like you and other VPs is really proactivity in terms of what the business needs, and that's kind of exactly what you said. So it's good to get another data point there.
Yeah. It's
not always the easiest thing in the world for some RevOps folks to step out of the weeds, kind of develop that business acumen, zoom out on the business. They're really busy. They sometimes don't always have that mentor. Do you have any other advice on how folks can do that? I think the mentor piece to me is like the biggest one, but is there anything else that you did or have seen in your career that can help folks?
Yeah, I had a manager, 10 years ago, maybe now, who had this really cool saying, and it speaks exactly to this. And he would always say, like, if you want to know what impacts a business, get close to where the money changes hands, right? And so sometimes in our RevOps world, like we're dealing with IT people and marketing and all these folks. And sometimes you don't have that mentorship or that example to strive towards, and you've kind of got to build it, which is a great adventure to have. But you need to get complete visibility of all the other parts of the business, right? So like if you're in RevOps and you don't spend time talking to sellers, go talk to sellers and see what they're saying and what are they hearing from customers. If you have a partner go-to-market motion, like, and you're not talking to the partners or the business development teams, like go spend time with them and learn about what they're doing to impact the business and how they think about things. And so speaking to all these different constituents, you start to build this mental model of, okay, this is the way our business works, and these are the big levers to pull, these are the smaller levers, and you can start to navigate it that way. So getting out of the weeds is probably the first piece of advice I give people when they're trying to, I want to be more strategic, right? Get out of the weeds, go talk to people in the organization that you don't normally talk to, like learn about the business.
Yeah, and ironically, that can actually make your life easier too. If you have a million things in the weeds on your to-do list, but you then go talk to people and realize that they don't care about these things. You can find something people do care about, and it might even be less work for bigger impacts. I think it's wins all across the board.
You're right on. Talking to different constituents and stakeholders that you might not regularly interact with helps you prioritize things in your world immensely. I can't tell you how many times you go through the list of stuff that you and your team are doing, and then you go talk to people, and you come back and you look at the list and you're like, why are we doing this? Nobody wants it and they don't need it. Like what, right? Get it out of there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're right on.
It's so funny how that happens. It happens to everyone too. So I'm glad I'm not crazy because that happens in accounting as well sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Let's move forward a little bit. So you and I spoke in the past around your experience managing teams. So you've run some pretty big teams, both RevOps and Chief Operating Officer. What's your best advice for a first-time manager?
First-time manager, depending on the scope, right, of resources that are under your purview. So if it's a first-time manager with, 2 direct reports, or it's a first-time manager and you happen to have 4 direct reports and they've each got teams. Like, it depends a little, but I think as a first-time manager, the similarity between those two is you want to be very clear to assess what you've got and what you don't got in your team, right? And that could be in terms of skill sets, attitude, aptitude, career vision. Like, just know what you're working with, and that's kind of where you start. And then the second piece is the hardest part for first-time managers, which is you have to be a little hands-off. And that's the part that people struggle with the most, right? Because I used to be the CRM administrator and I would worry about all the system integrations and the data. Well, now I've got a team and I've got to let them do their thing. If they struggle, I'm ready to jump in and help and assess and advance it. But now you've got people, you don't have to do that anymore. The example I give to a lot of RevOps people who are in maybe some earlier stages of their career and smaller companies is CRM reporting, right? When you're an individual contributor, you are reporting on everything in your CRM system. When you're a manager, don't write a report. See what happens, right? And that helps you circle back to this assessment of, oh, I've got super competent people who can do this, and they're better than I was oftentimes, So you got to get out of the weeds a little bit, and it's not so much getting out of the weeds. It's like people do their thing, right? And it's the hardest part for a first-time manager, of being a little more hands-off, and you're observing, you're not doing, right?
Yeah. How about the kind of like other end of the spectrum, sort of, when as you grow in your career, you're probably going to be put over functions that you don't have direct expertise in, maybe enablement, maybe data and analytics. I've seen those two common things for RevOps to fall under. Curious if you have experience like adopting an org that you hadn't actually worked in before, and how does that work? Is it a similar model where you kind of just have to trust them? Like, that feels a little bit scarier to me because you might not know what good looks like.
Yeah, well, so you're right. You don't necessarily know what good looks like, and you do have to trust, but trust and verify. Right? I think that's the beauty of being a manager in a new space, is it scratches the itch to learn something new. And you can really dive in. I had to do that several companies ago where there was online paid marketing function that I had never really dealt with hands-on. But you got to get smart about it real quick, right? And we're in a world where there's a ton of resources available. But again, go talk to people, right? Like in that space, go talk to your ad vendors, talk to marketing agencies, like talk to the experts and get smart about it. You're never gonna be as smart in that as quickly as the people who've been doing it for much longer than you, but you get smart enough. And again, if you circle back to why are we doing this, what impact does it have on the business, you get smart enough to know which questions to ask, right? And you know which trends matter. You know what the KPIs are, what the critical metrics are, and then you can start to shape okay, I've got people, the metrics are telling me a story, like now it's all coming together, right? So it's a series of kind of checks and balances, but you do have to verify, and you have to do that by just getting smart. I don't know that I've ever heard of a successful manager who's absorbed a brand new function that they do nothing about, and they just leave it alone, right? Never, right? You gotta get smart.
Yeah, makes sense. How about this? Maybe like some inside baseball. Maybe the answer ends up being really obvious. As you're growing in your career, you've taken on a lot of these functions or sub-functions, I'll call it. Like, I think some people that I talk to, it makes them a little nervous, right? It's like, oh, I haven't done this before. I don't match everything on the job description. I'm curious, like, how those conversations have gone in your experience when you're like getting a big team increase, functional increase, how you've, what people were asking of you, how you thought about in terms of taking it on. Are there scenarios where you shouldn't take it on? Like, how do you think about all of this?
I think it depends on the scope and the scale. I think if you're taking on or being asked to take on oftentimes something that's new, it's okay to ask what support is in place, right? And because it's not always like the people and the resources that you absorb, but there's like tangential help, right? And it's like, what does the support structure look like for this? I think that's one. The other thing is really getting back to basics a little bit, where you're in the job, but the scope is expanding, and it's totally fair game to ask your manager, the regional leader, whoever's in charge, what does success look like if I go down this path, right? Like, you're asking me to absorb these teams, and I'm I'm happy to do it, and it's great for career advancement. Thank you very much. But what is going to make this a success in your eyes? And that kind of short circuits it right down to the, here's the problem that, either the last person didn't do, or, this group is not cohesive and they're not tied to the business, whatever. You're going to find out exactly what you got to go get, right? And oftentimes it's not a skills issue, particularly if it's like a large team and it's being bolted onto another large team. It's all about alignment. There is so much that gets achieved just by communicating between different teams and different functions, because by that point, like you've got enough skill sets in-house to do the job. And maybe there's a function that they're not all A+ players, they're B+, but like they can do the job. But let's get them all aligned to make sure that what they're able to do gets you to where you need to go.
Yeah, this could probably be a whole 45-minute episode in and of itself, but alignment is like the proverbial, challenge. Like, any very abbreviated answers on how you've tackled alignment and in those situations that you mentioned? Is it just does bringing it under one umbrella usually help to have someone like Franco connecting the dots, or?
It so depends on the way the organization is structured and the way the rest of the organization is aligned. So years ago, when RevOps was gaining steam, the answer was, well, just put it all into RevOps and it magically happens. Not always, right? Like if the rest of the organization or different parts of the organization that rely on this support function are not aligned, and like all you've done is move the problem from one hand to the other, right? So alignment is huge, and I think the way you overcome that is go talk to people. Right? Go talk to your stakeholders, learn about what matters to them, the problems they're trying to solve, and then you can take that back to say, okay, how is my team tied into that? How can we support that? How can we help them get ahead of it? And it's different in every organization. Now, if you've got an organization that is super aligned at the leadership level and it cascades down, then some small organizational changes, it just flows within the culture and the structure of the company, and off you go, right? Like everyone's already aligned, but you've got to make sure that alignment happens, because otherwise you're just moving the coconut shells, as they say.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely helpful, and definitely easier said than done. I'm sure through you, as you've lived it.
Always.
That makes sense. We talked about like career growth a lot. Growing teams, expanding quite a bit. We kind of took as given in that discussion RevOps person's perception in the business. And I think you touched on this in the beginning by talking about, be open, go talk to people, have good role models. But like, I don't know if RevOps folks are always the best at branding themselves. So like, how should folks think about like positioning themselves within their company to continue climbing the RevOps ladder?
There is, this is not, blanket or umbrella, but more often than not, there is a phrase that RevOps can use that really unlocks the second part of the conversation that gets them where they need to go. And that phrase, when you're dealing with different stakeholders, is, how can my team help? Like, just ask that question, put it out there, and let's go, right? You're going to learn so much about the priorities and the different items and projects and initiatives that people are working on, and really what they care about and what they don't. And that allows you to have the conversation of, we can help with that, we can be helpful, we can be useful. We don't have the skill set to do that, but I can find it, right? And like, now you're having a conversation where stakeholders and leaders leave to say, boy, that RevOps leader was willing to do whatever he or she could to really help us out, and they asked insightful questions, and they didn't kind of come with one solution to one size fits all. So like, how can I help is this phrase that there's a handful of them in life, right? Like, that's one of them in the RevOps world that really opens people up, and you just kind of really figure it out quick.
I love that. And kind of similarly, as we think about internal positioning, you and I talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago. Like, how can you, mid-career RevOps, kind of assess how others view you? Like we talked about, if you're seen just as a Salesforce admin, it's limiting, and maybe just being open with how can I help, it helps break that perception. But how can you kind of, before that, even understand like how you're being viewed, and if you're kind of maybe on the path for potential advancement?
Yeah, I think there's always the usual methods of regular performance touch points with your manager. 60 reviews are fabulous for that, and the larger the organization, the more formal that review process is. But again, it's asking. Like, ask the question to, your manager or a stakeholder, like, how am I doing? Are you getting what you need? Like, what areas can I improve in? And again, much easier said than done, because human beings just have a difficult time asking for feedback. And when you open it up to how am I doing, you don't know what's coming. It could be the good, it could be the bad, right? Like, it might lead to this is a performance conversation now, which, like, that might be okay,
Better
right?
to know than to not, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny kind of how that works, but I think that's really one way to do it. The other, which is a little more kind of behind the scenes, is if you're in a RevOps space, maybe at a company that's big enough, you can do some benchmarking, right, with others in the space. Like, if you're leading RevOps at a $100 million company, well, how are we comparing to other companies in the space? And there's plenty of social groups and formal networking functions. Like, you can start to get a pretty good idea of, are we way off base here, or are we on par with how others are doing it and how they're thinking about it and some of the projects that they're leaning into. There's a totally external view, right? Because every company's different, but it can give you kind of an informal checkpoint.
Yeah, that's great. Sadly, we're almost at time here. I have one or two more questions for you, and it's about making that kind of like final jump to VP of RevOps. And actually, maybe hopefully it's not final, but that's what a lot of people see as kind of like the pinnacle. I want to start by just like company fit. And so I think not every company actually needs a VP of RevOps. So in your perspective, from what you've seen, like, when does a company start to need a VP of RevOps, and what does that role even kind of like entail versus, say, director, senior director?
Yeah, there's no good answer. It's going to differ wildly from companies, right? Based on their size and their scope. I have seen plenty of people who are the VP of RevOps, and they're at a $20 million company, and they have one analyst who works for them, and they're the VP of RevOps, right? And that's great for that company, but could that VP of RevOps go to a $400 million company and be a VP of RevOps and succeed? Not sure, right? Be an outstanding individual, might be a unicorn, but those are the exceptions. So I think truly what you start to build this model of, okay, when does a company need a VP of RevOps and someone at that level? Number one, they have to be big enough where they're working strategically with the business leaders, right? Sales leaders, marketing leaders, customer leaders. But there needs to be enough specialization underneath them that their superpower at that scale becomes tying the whole thing together. So we've got an enablement function, we've got a deal desk function, we've got analytics, we've got systems and process, we've got training and onboarding, and it's like, this is the person that brings it all together. Mm-hmm. At the smaller company, that VP is the one person that does all those things, right? Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to play it out in this kind of structure. And part of the difficulty is RevOps means different things to different people at different companies. Oh, yeah. So not every RevOps function at every company is going to have enablement, analytics, deal desk or commercial systems, right? Like, sometimes you've only got two. Sometimes it's deal desk and systems. Right? And that's okay if the company is big enough and scaled enough and there's enough stakeholders and there's enough volume or whatever the metrics are. Like, could you put a VP on top of that? Yeah, you could, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got to kind of feel it out, right? But it's generally a question of scale and specialization. Those are kind of the two vectors you end up with.
Okay. I wish I would have asked this question to start with, because I think it'll actually be really fascinating. Maybe we'll have to have you on for a second podcast next year or something. But you talked about at the $400 million company, the VP of RevOps needs to be the person that kind of brings it all together across all those various functions you mentioned. What does that take? Like, is there a certain skill set, experience, maybe even, if you toot your own horn a little bit, which I imagine you won't because you're very humble, but like, what does it take to be good at that? Is it supreme organization? Is it something else?
It takes a lot of empathy, because the bigger the company, the more moving parts there are. And the more constituents and stakeholders that RevOps has to work with and support. So it takes a lot of empathy. It does take some experience to some point, right? You can't take a head of RevOps from a $20 million company and drop them into a $200 million company and expect the same thing. Back to what we were talking about at the outset, like having a role model, an exemplar, like something that you can, work towards, and you have to know what it looks like at that level. And it is vastly different, right? When the head of RevOps at a multi-$100 million company, you're not writing any reports, right? You're not digging into maybe some analytics. You're not checking, the marketing click-through rates. Like you've got teams and you got people, but you're bringing it together, working with the business leaders to try and formulate or present the insights, right? Like all this work that's happening in the engine room, like what are we noticing and what do we think you need to know about, Whereas at a much smaller company, the head of RevOps needs to make sure the data is deduped, the reports are there, all the automation works, right? Like it's a different type of adventure and a different skill set. So you need to be able to come out of the weeds, keep talking about the business and how you can impact the business, and then have some resources to do it, right? Nobody can do everything.
Yeah, cool. I think it's a great place to leave it. I wish we had another 30 minutes, but Franco, thanks so much for coming on. I thought it was a really interesting conversation.
This is great. Thanks for having me. We'll talk again soon.
Of course.